This is the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with your host, Vicki Davis.
Today's podcast is being sponsored by MadLearn, my favorite tool for app building and the one I'm using this year with my 9th grade students. Stay tuned at the end of the show to learn how you can get a hands-on free trial. So today we're talking with my friend Alefiya Master from MadLearn. Now, it's not a commercial. You know, I don't have a lot of companies on here. 10 years ago in the hallway at ISTE, you had a little girl, it was in Atlanta, that was presenting about, was her name Kennedy? What was her name?
Wow, that's
Kennedy. How did I
fabulous memory.
It's not usually that good. It was talking about an app she had made. And I was like, oh, what is this app? And then I interviewed her, found out the company, and then Alefiya and I became friends. And for many, many years, my students have built on her platform and then did the first global collaborative app building with Mad About Mattering.
Thanks to you.
And a lot of other people. But today we actually want to talk about building apps with students and collaboration. So some teachers think, well, it's hard to get students in a group of 2 to work together. And how can you get kids to collaboratively build apps together? So what are the current best practices you're seeing as you work with teachers?
We learn from the best, and we have learned so much from you. And I'm so glad that you have me on today because it truly is. You have been such an inspiration for me, for our whole team, as we've really developed and continuing to constantly develop what we can offer our teachers and students. And so one of the best examples that you showed us is making it meaningful. Right? Really, truly making it meaningful for the students. We talk about collaboration. It's not just arbitrarily, these are the 4 kids that are going to be on that team, work together. It's figuring out what their interests are, what drives them, what they're passionate about. Some of your kids, if I remember correctly, made apps about some really intense social issues.
Yeah, there was one on self-harm and cutting called Uncut, and that was a tough one. I'll admit, it's not for everybody because we had to have a lot of conversations and not triggering.
Absolutely. And it was a group of kids that came together because they felt a certain way about it and they wanted to help and they wanted to create something that was meaningful. So I think the forced collaboration is where we tend to find that struggle and the battle of, oh, I don't want to work with so-and-so, or that's not my friend. But if you focus it on affinity and affinity grouping and interest grouping and passion grouping, you tend to see that natural collaboration ensue. And it's so important to have our kids collaborate.
So how is it working now? How are teachers finding those affinity groups, those common passions? Are they doing it with like Post-it note brainstorming on the board, or how's that coming about in classrooms now?
Everything that we believe is so fundamental for students is the process of design thinking, right? That engineering design process that we know is so important. The first step of that is brainstorming, empathizing, coming up with an idea, ideation. A lot of, within MadLearn, for example, we have integrated modules for design thinking. All of those 6 steps are integrated into the tool. So when I log in, I say, okay, I want to create an app. Step 1, think of an idea. Now I can actually see a list of ideas from everyone else in my school. And I could say, oh, so-and-so's doing that, or so-and-so's interested in that. Maybe I can work with him. Or so-and-so has that idea, but I think this might be a cooler thing. Let me go talk to them and see if we can work together.
Oh, I love that.
So you're not just in your own silo of my ideas, because sometimes it's hard, right, to think of an idea. That first step is often the hardest. Now we have this inspiration board, if you will, where you can share ideas across the school.
And I always, when working with Genius projects and app building projects, try to find those things that I'll tell a student, they're like, well, I don't know what to do. And I'll say, well, what's something that you could just talk to me about forever and that maybe a lot of your friends might say they're bored. But what is that thing you can just go on and on about? Because that kind of shows your passions. And when you can put those kids together, whether they're talking about Minecraft or whatever it is, then there's no end in their interest level in that topic.
I have to tell you a story of one of my favorite apps. So we have an app called Mad Store, which is our version of the App Store. So the best apps get published on the Mad Store. There's one on there called Potato World. Look it up on the Mad Store, Potato World. I kid you not, this is an app all about potatoes. Now, when I heard this from the kids, I was like, really? Come on, guys. But it is one of the most liked and highest rated apps on our Mad Store. It's in-depth information about all kinds of potatoes. There's a potato video, there's a talking potato, there's a potato award. I mean, recipes with potatoes, anything you can think of. Because that group of kids were like, we love potatoes, we're gonna make a potato app.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the best that one of my students created was Drone Zone. and it was all about drones. Okay, so you have your design thinking, you have your ideation, and then you start building together. And you know some of the typical issues that you have when you start building together. How would you characterize those issues as teachers start collaborating and working together so they can kind of know what things do you observe?
One of the biggest things is setting roles and responsibilities within a team. And it's not that that person is only going to do that, but that person is the one responsible for it to get it done somehow. So for example, who's going to be the designer of our team and work on the images and the look and the feel for our app? Who is going to be the coder and really kind of create some in-depth screens for our app? Who's going to be the one that's testing it and making sure it works, being a part of that iterative process, right? All the kids should have experiences with all of those things, but if you are collaborating and working together as a team, having some of those roles like you would in real life, right? At a company, we have teams, we have a project manager, we have all kinds of different people that are doing different things, but we have to work so closely together. And I think emulating some of that in the classroom is so helpful as well. It's not that one person, in, again, real world setting, it's not that one person at a company is doing all of the roles or all of the jobs that that company needs. You have specializations, but then you have to work together and kind of bring it all together.
And as the teacher, having PMs or project managers and APMs, assistant project managers, is really, really helpful from a management standpoint, because if you've got 6 to 8 apps being built in a classroom, you can have a meeting with your PMs and your APMs, and you kind of help kids understand, okay, this is how the real world works. Some kids, you know, when I do it, almost can have a pushback on the emotional intelligence required, because they're like, well, I just want to do it by myself. I can control myself. And you're like, hey, that's not the real world. The real world is you have to learn to motivate and work with people.
It really is. And there are people that have learned and realized that they're individual contributors and they're really good at that, and that's where they need to function, and that's fine. But in a world that is changing as quickly as it is, we know we can't prepare our kids for the jobs of tomorrow. We don't know what those jobs are going to be. So what we can prepare them with is those skills. And like my dear friend Greg Stone has been with me at Mad Learn since the very beginning, likes to say it's not soft skills, it's vital and transferable skills. Right? What are those skills that we can teach our kids that transfer across career, across industry? And they're so vital. They're so vital.
And one of the things I really like is having authentic products for kids. And that's what an app does, because they can see it and they can see the live changes and they can see the things that are happening. So what do you observe happens to kids when they see something that they made and they see it on their phone?
That's the best part. You know, a lot of times we get the question, why apps, right? I can learn how to create anything. I can code anything. And why apps? The reason that we focus on apps and building apps and getting kids to build apps is because the reality is every student has or has access to that phone.
That's right.
And they're on their phone 24/7.
They are.
That is the language they speak, much more than their computer or whatever else that we've got in the room. The phone is what they get. I was on a panel, I was listening to a panel of high school students just a couple months ago, a lunch panel, and it was 7 kids. Somebody in the audience said, so tell us about the cell phone policy in your school. And the student said, when you take my phone away from me at the beginning of class, you might laugh, but to me it feels like you're pulling my arm off. That's how important these phones are to the kids. So let's use that as a hook to bring them into computer science and STEM, right? It needs to not just be our 5 or 10 kids that are in a computer science class. It needs to be all of our kids.
Yeah, which is what's so great about object-oriented type programming, where you focus on the text and such. So Alefiya, Master, Mad Learn, talking about project-based learning. We're talking about collaborative learning. We're talking about authentic learning with authentic products. These are all things that we need in the classroom that we've been talking about for a very long time. Mad Learn is a very cool tool I have used quite a bit in my history to help kids build apps. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Vicki.
Today's sponsor, Mad Learn, is an easy tool for students to use to build apps of their own in a private space for just you and your students. You can publish it and share it with a limited audience or design something bigger. When people ask me my favorite app building tool, I always say Mad Learn. Not only have I used Mad Learn for the first global collaborative app building project, I love having my students build together and host a Shark Tank competition. I love how my students can edit together, but also view live changes on their smartphone using a QR code demo that is still private just to them and me. Their site is full of every presentation rubric and even a full curriculum, so I can teach design thinking and app building to my students. Go to coolcatteacher.com/try-mad-learn and sign up today for your free trial. That's coolcatteacher.com/try-mad-learn.
You've been listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. If you want more content from Vicki Davis, you can find her on Facebook, x.com, TikTok, Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky, and YouTube at Cool Cat Teacher. Thank you for listening.